dimples was hard, so.
Yes, getting people smoothed out can be kind of a challenge. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Challenge.
Okay, so for you guys, Okay. There we go. Come on. Okay. Woohoo. So I think some of you picked up some underglaze and oxide, am I right?
I haven't done that yet.
Yes.
I will.
Have it?
Yes.
Okay.
I got it. I got it.
Okay. So I was going to talk about those a little today, and my Dropbox link just went a little funny. So I am going to share my screen, but I want to make sure that if anything happens, you aren't disconnected from the material. So let's see. Share. Okay. So can people see a screen that says Glaze Lecture 2?
Yep.
Okay. You guys are wonderful. Thank you for putting up with my insecurities. Okay, so all righty. So we are going to talk about this a little bit. We talked a little bit on our last glaze lecture about colorants in terms of what they, in terms of glaze recipes, but I wanted to just go a little deeper just because it's an important part of glaze making, but we're also going to use oxides a little bit on their own. We're going to use stain in the form of underglaze, so I wanted to make sure that you guys kind of had a deeper understanding of what that is. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Great, okay. Move this around here. Okay, cool. Okay, so we talked a little bit about oxides, and in ceramics, oxides is one of those words that's a little confusing because we use it for, mostly for referring to the colorants, which are sometimes oxides and sometimes their chemical name is not oxide, but we still call them oxides. So, move you in a little closer. Okay, good, okay. Okay, as far as I go. So these are raw powdered metal. The ones that are most common, the really common one is iron. It gets used for a lot of things. It's super cheap, very, and it has a variety of usages. So also more common are copper, a little less common is manganese. Cobalt is common, a little more expensive. They could be oxides or carbonate, like we said. The oxide form is usually stronger. So if you see something that says cobalt oxide instead of cobalt carbonate, it's going to be a little more saturated. They can vary in fired results depending on the amount, the percentage in the glaze, the atmosphere they're fired in, application, how they're applied, anything. They're pretty changeable. Okay, but here's kind of a fuller list of the oxides that you'll find if you went on the Clay Planet website and kind of went down their raw materials list. Chromium oxide, that one can range from being pink in some forms to acid colored greens, browns in larger amount. Cobalt carbonate is royal blue. Cobalt oxide is the same. It's more saturated blue. It can also be a little coarser. You get like kind of like freckles of blue that fire around it. Copper carbonate can range from jade green to even a copper red in high fire reduction glazes. Copper oxide comes in a lot of forms, the most common red or black. It's also more saturated. You need less of it. The black is a little darker when it's applied heavier. Iron oxide comes in a lot of different forms. Usually you see red or black or yellow. It almost always fires red. So when I was just beginning, we used to get black iron oxide and think it was really exciting. We'd put it all over things and then it would just fire red. But it's a beautiful kind of charcoal black when it's in its raw form. It's kind of deceptive. Small amounts of iron oxide in glazes in reduction will get you celadons. We've talked about celadons. And then manganese dioxide can range from, in small amounts, will turn a glaze kind of a warm light yellow. Larger amounts, really deep black. So that's our main kind of black. Nickel carbonate, not used as commonly. Usually you get grays, blues, and yellows. It also kind of modifies other colors. Same with nickel oxide. And then there's one that's called rutile. Okay. And rutile is kind of like not quite no pacifier. It's not quite a color. It's kind of a special animal. Rutile is a mix of titanium and a little bit of iron. It's usually got a variety of different colorants in it. Generally what it does is it provides variegation to other colors. So it's almost like a marbling component. So if you had a blue glaze that you wanted to look kind of furry or cloudy, you would add a little bit of rutile in it. And this is a guy who tested it. I think this is like 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%. So this is the same base glaze here. He's just increased the amount of rutile on there, and that you can see how that has affected the texture of the glaze.
Michelle, are you
seeing any of
sharing
that. I just see glaze
something
luster
past?
too.
What's
We're
happened?
just looking at we're only seeing your title slide.
Oh,
So we
no.
haven't seen anything past your title slide.
Okay,
Wasn't sure if you were switching.
I am switching.
Okay, yeah.
Yuck. Okay, so you guys might need to follow along with me or I might need to dip out of this. Let's see. Okay. What's going on with you?
Is this lecture also posted?
It is, or it will be, yeah. But this is the link that I just shared with you guys in chat. Do you guys see that on your?
It's starting to move, yeah. I think you're getting it, maybe. I see movement, but it's not loading yet. There it goes, yeah.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay. Sorry about
Okay.
that, guys. Okay. So this
Can you
is.
go to the slide before that just for a second? Just
I can
yeah.
I can go back. Yeah. So this is.
Interesting.
Yeah. I went and looked for all these images too. Sorry, guys. So yeah, we've got copper carbonate over here. So we talked a little bit about that. Copper carbonate is really popular for raku glazes because it's low firing. Some of these oxides, they also act as a flux. We've talked about flux and how they melt. Some of these are natural fluxes, and they will almost be glazes on their own with just a little bit of something in there to make them stick to the clay. So copper is really popular for that. It reacts really well in reduction. It'll do a lot of really wild and crazy things. Cobalt can flux a little bit. Can you see the seal here that's got cobalt lines? You guys seen that?
Mm-hmm.
The square. So you
Yeah.
can see,
Yes.
yeah, you can see there's this kind of furry little line around there. So it's mostly crisp, but the cobalt does melt out a little bit under the glaze. So this is under a celadon glaze here. It's got this kind of furry cloud on there that's really pretty. And this is black copper oxide, just used as a wash. So this isn't in a glaze at all. This is just kind of how I'm going to show you guys how I like to use it a lot is like this. is where you just have it suspended in water, and then you can use it kind of like a watercolor wash, and they pick up the texture of what you apply them to. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a list of really less common colorants on here. I know when a lot of people start ceramics, they're like, how can I make things gold? How can I make things orange? How can I make things bronze, you know, silver, or metallic? There are ways, but the ways to do it are either expensive, bad for you, or really rare. So, so it's yes with caveats, but I did put them down here so you guys can kind of see. You can even use gold in ceramics, but it fires at a very low temperature, so you have to do those in separate firings. That's usually a cone like 022. It's like you have to do, people who work with gold have a specialized setup for it. Okay. Okay, so oxides can be reactive, especially in glazes. So if you've added some like copper or chromium to a glaze, sometimes they travel. So when glazes fire in a kiln, they also give off fumes because they're off gassing some of their organic particles and some of their metallic particles from the fire. And so they can travel around to other people's pots. So that's why we say placement in a kiln can also really affect the way that glazes come out, because some glazes will actually affect each other and almost talk to each other. There's an issue with chromium, especially for people who do like what's called maiolica glazes, which is a tin glaze that you do glazing over the top of to get these really pretty colors. The chromium, if it's in any glaze in a kiln with those maiolica glazes, will turn all of the white glaze in that kiln pink. And then it can happen with cobalt, copper in other kilns. It can just kind of like flash onto different pots, which you just kind of have to be into that part of the process. I think it's really pretty. Some people don't like it at all when someone's pot flashes onto theirs, but it's just all part of the process. And then there's chemicals that aren't oxides. They're fluxes, which we talked a little bit on fluxes. I'm going to do a different section on this, but there's chemicals like barium or lithium that can actually affect the hue and the temperature of the colorant. So if you have a blue glaze and you add, and it's got some barium in it, it has more kind of like an acidy look. The colors are very cold looking. A lot of arts and craft pottery uses kind of barium. So we also talked about how colorants, the same colorant can have a really different effect. So if you have 1% of manganese or even 0.5% of manganese in a glaze, it can be a yellow glaze. And even just going up as high as 4% manganese in a glaze can give you a black glaze. So there's a lot of variance. Okay. So advantages of oxides is you can do, traditional surfaces. It's kind of a very earthy aesthetic, very historical. It's a good collaboration with the process. I mean, your kiln is always going to affect oxides in certain ways that are very unique. Oxides like iron, super cheap. I have pounds of it that's going to last me the rest of my life. And then they're very strong colorants, so you don't need a lot of it. Like we said, like even just 1% to 5% is almost all you'll need for a lot of these oxides. Okay, so stains. Stains are a little different. So we've talked, I think, a little bit about frits in my first lecture. And just to remind you, a frit is a recipe of pre-measured chemicals that are all mixed together. And then what they actually do is put all of those chemicals into a crucible. So it's like a clay jar. They put it in a kiln. They fire the whole thing until it's like it turns into a molten form. And then they take that glass form after it cools and they crush it up and break it into a powder. And then they sell the powder. So it usually has like a large amount of ingredients in it that would be impractical for probably the studio potter to use. It just makes your life easier if you buy things that are pre-mixed. And so they're really predictable. So it's not going to come out different every time the way an oxide would. So if you have a blue underglaze, the colorant that makes the blue is cobalt, but it's already been pre-fired in there and then ground up. So that blue is kind of like crayon color. It's going to be really predictable. It's not going to do a lot of weird things. It's already been fired and taken through kind of the stress of being heated up. So it can be fired again in its powdered form, but it's not going to be as reactive. So the colors that you have in underglazes, which use stain, you can mix the colors so what you see is what you get. So if you have blue and yellow, you can mix half and half together and make green or different shades of green. Okay, so the one thing about stains though is that they, some of the colors, especially like the yellows, pinks, corals, the kind of pastels, they can be a little more delicate and high fire. So what I've given you guys, or what you're going to pick up, is this brand Western, which does go to cone 10, but some of the colors can be a little faded in reduction, cone 10 firing. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind if you're planning on making a whole piece yellow. You might not want to because it could bleach out like one side of your piece if it got hit with reduction flame. Sometimes that's a little reactive. But the color will stay the same. It's not going to change into brown or anything like that. Blues, greens, some of the darker underglazes, they're a little more stable. So mason stains are just generally the industry standard. It's not like a technical term for anything. The brand is just called Mason. And so there's about 95 of them. I just did a screen cap of their website here. It shows just a few of them, but they're usually referred to by their name and their catalog number. So if you were to order stain, you would just go in and say you want Mason stain, 6,000 and shell pink. And they usually sell them in about a pound. So you get this dry powdered material if you want to buy raw stain. So stains are what we use if you've used commercial glazes, like those ones that are just out of the bottle. Usually that's what everybody uses first. If you've got pink glaze, brown glaze, anything like that, that's got stain in it. The underglazes, like I said, that's got stain. Underglaze chalk and pencils, those are stain. Overglazes, which we haven't talked about, we don't use them much in the studio. Those are China paint, they use stain. And people who use colored slip or clay, that's also stain. Okay. So stain does have some downsides. It can be really expensive, especially depending on the color, especially like the reds. They have to do kind of a special process, and the base chemicals they use to get those reds are really rare and expensive. So those stains tend to be the most expensive. Like we did say, they can fade in some of the higher temperatures of reduction, usually pretty stable, but if you use small amounts, you can usually get your red or your yellow. But like I said, just if you use it on a large piece, if there's areas that get hit by the flame a little more directly, that can fade some of the more delicate colors. So if you do like things that are more reactive, the way the oxides are, the stains are not going to be the way you want to go. They are very predictable. They're not going to ever, you're not going to put them under a glaze and get like an interesting oil spot or something like that. It's pretty much kind of like what you see is what you get. It's like working with paint. If you are super interested in doing something like coloring slip or clay with stain, that can be very expensive. So if you want like cobalt blue, if you want your clay to be like this color, you would have to use a lot of stain and it would be expensive to do. The underglazes themselves, I think this pint was about $15. The nice thing about using just the underglazes, a little goes a long way, but if you want to start working with raw stains, that can kind of set you back. The other thing about stains is that because of the process where they're fritted and powdered, even if you use them in a liquid form and paint them on, sometimes if you try to glaze over them, if they're too thick, they can cause crawling of the glaze because they create kind of a barrier between the clay and the glaze, which can keep the glaze from adhering to the clay body. Okay. Kind of talked about that already. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted you guys to work with these just because I thought with our online, you know, situation that we have, that having something that wasn't just the dip glazes where we're trying to brush them on, this would just give you a few more choices on how to color things. So I just wanted to give you guys kind of an intro to how to use them. So we're going to use underglaze just right out of the jar. I think I was going to do a little demo on how to mix colors with them and paint them on, but I think I'll save that until I'm sure most of you guys already have them. Oxides, though, this is pretty easy. Gave you guys probably about a 2-inch or a 2-ounce little container of oxides, and a little goes a long way. So I've got this container here. It's got about 4 ounces of water, and I think I used less than a tablespoon of oxide, and it's really vivid. Let's see. So you don't need a lot. You want this to be kind of the consistency of thin milk. And it's still got a lot of pigment on it. You can see it still covers the brush, but it's still liquid enough to drip. So start off with a smaller amount of water. You can add more water.
This is the oxide?
This is the oxide, yeah. So this is red iron oxide. Okay, so I think I'm gonna save underglazes just because we went, I'll do that for next time. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen. You guys are so patient, thank you. All right, so should be able to see most of me again, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I have, you can see it a little bigger. This is the red iron oxide. And like I said to you guys on our last lecture, these are very staining. It's not toxic, but it will get on everything. So use it in a covered place where you can get it dirty. And even just adding a little bit of water to it, you still have a lot of pigment in there. Let's see, I have a piece here. It's got fired oxide on it. So this is just bisque with oxide on there. So I bisque the piece. Generally, you want to bisque the piece first and then apply oxide, just if you want to do it where it picks up a lot of texture, because you're going to want to sponge it off. So if you take a piece and you try to sponge off of greenware, that can, that'll kind of buff down the texture on your piece. And then if you have any kind of design under there, it'll disappear. So that's kind of not desirable.
Is it worth trying to save what you sponge off?
If you have like a dedicated oxide sponge, you can keep using it. Yeah, so you can keep kind of re-wetting your sponge. Once you've got your system kind of going, I've got a clean sponge here, but I'll probably save the sponge, and when I need to do more, I can go in and just use what I have on the sponge. So I'm going to apply a little oxide on here. So I've got this piece that had some lettering on there. And if the oxide is too creamy or thick, it's really hard to sponge off because this is really saturated. You don't need a lot. I'm just going to put it in the lines there. I'm going to take some water, get my sponge wet.
Funny.
Yeah. So it's even where you sponge it off, it is going to stay on your clay. So this isn't really what you want to use if you just want, you know, two-tone. This is more for kind of more subtle things. But it's nice if you got something where you want the stain to pick up kind of the deeper texture there.
Mm-hmm.
But it will also kind of stay in things that are a little more shallow. It's pretty. So if you've got something that you kind of rolled like leaves in or something like that, that looks really pretty, you can get it bisqued and then put some stain on there. And then that'll pick up the texture of what you pressed in your clay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can control it. And it's kind of what you see is what you get. It's going to fire a little darker. And when you reduce it, of course, it'll be a little darker. But you're able to kind of see what you're doing. Where with glaze, it's kind of hard to say if like the thin spot's going to look bald or if it's going to look, you know, the color that you wanted or something like that. This is a little something that gives you a little more direction on your design making. You can see the letters picked up in there really well. Mm-hmm. And you can use it for line work too. So, I mean, you don't have to sponge it off of everything. You can use it over the top of glaze or under glaze. You just have to keep in mind, like we talked about with oxide, some of them flux. So if you do have a line that you glazed on there, it can be runny. So you have to just kind of commit yourself to the fact that it's not always going to be as crisp as, say, an underglaze. I've got my sample here. I've always got my Hall of Shame samples to show you guys.
No.
So this is my actual first thrown piece ever from College of San Mateo. I've saved it all these years from the early 90s. This is the first thing I ever had survive the whole throwing and trimming, bisquing and firing. I was so proud of it. And I've got a Celadon glaze on the inside, and I've got a Temuku glaze on the outside. And I thought, oh, this is going to look just like the pictures, you know, just like everybody else. I'm like, oh, I've got this in my mind. And I put this little floral design on the inside. Let's see if you guys can see in there. Yeah, so I did these little 4-dot flowers that looked so beautiful before it was fired. And then it just ran like sad tears down the inside. So, you know, it's still a nice.
That's amazing for a first bowl, though. I'm like looking at it going,
oh,
wow.
No. This was after 4 weeks of going home covered with slip every single day because I was so bad at throwing. I didn't drive either. I had to take the bus.
Mine weighs like 20 pounds.
I think this took me all semester. Yeah. So this is not my first piece. This was the first piece that survived. That's why it's precious to me. But yeah, so oxides, if you do line work underneath glaze, it can run a little bit like that. This also has, I put a splash of the same oxide on top of the Temuku there. Can you see that little, little flash there? So I just took my brush, loaded it up, and went boom across the outside there. So you can see it just loading it up a little more with the oxide. So the Temuku is colored with iron. So it's got enough iron in there. It makes it brown, but just a little more iron on top there. You can see it affects the glaze. So just tiny amounts can kind of change the way glazes look. I think that was, yeah, I think underglaze will do in a separate unit. That was a lot to chew off there, but I'll kind of show you what I do with stains. Generally what I do is I have a ground like this where I have the oxide stains, just because I like to use soldate to build, but I don't necessarily like the bisque color to glaze and do painting on. So a lot of times I alter it. So this piece here has the same coating underneath here, where I put the oxide underneath. And then in another firing, I've applied underglazes on top of the fired oxide, and then kind of use that as my ground to paint on, kind of like the way you treat watercolor paper. If you put like ink down and then paint on top of it, or use pastels, it's kind of what I use underglazes with. And then you can glaze over underglazes. I kind of like the way it looks dry. Generally what you want to do, some people can get away with like doing underglazes, letting them set, and then putting a coated glaze over there and firing it all in one firing. I tend to have kind of like slippy luck with that. Sometimes the stain in there can flux a little bit with the underglaze or the stain in there, and it can drip just a little bit. So I like that extra security of doing one more bisque firing before I apply glaze over the underglaze. You can use underglaze on unfired clay. So if you want to save yourself a firing that way, you can apply that to greenware. We'll talk about that more when we talk about underglazes. It's just if you do apply it to greenware, you want to make sure that you don't have a really wet brush and that you're mushing the color into your unfired clay, because it will pick up clay particles from your unfired clay and it will mix in with your colors, and that can make your colors fade a little bit. So if you are going to do it, you have to be really careful to not mush things into your piece as you're painting. And this is a piece, sorry, I'm doing show and tell now. This is a piece that's got some oxide fired on there. So this piece is just oxide, and then this piece is underglaze here. So I kind of changed it up a little bit, but you can see you can use both together, over each other, just for different effects. Got a little wire in there. We're going to talk about clay and metal. So do people have questions about that? Sorry, I got off on the wrong foot with my PowerPoint there. Any questions about anything?
Well, we're working on our portraits now. So like these, so for, sorry, I can't even talk.
That's okay.
So we can use like these techniques with the oxides on any of our stuff that's coming up, right? Or
Right.
is there a specific assignment for
Nope.
using these?
No, I wanted to introduce that early so you guys could use it on anything that you have that you're going to make or might make.
Perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I think in this week,
yeah,
in this week's announcement, I sent out the list of projects for the rest of the semester. They're more self-directed. So really the teapot and the portrait and to some extent the glaze project were kind of the three that were more directed with instructions. And then the list of the rest of the projects we do, they're much more open-ended. So I'm just trying to decide how I'm going to structure that for you guys, because right now everything's kind of been in these discrete units on Canvas. And when we work face to face, it doesn't really matter because I can just kind of walk around and talk to people about what they're working on. But I want you guys to be able to work on those in the order that you want, and not have specific due dates for each one. I'm thinking of just kind of like I don't know if we want to just have a discussion thread that you guys can just post anything you want on that and just give feedback to each other on whatever you want, or if you want discussion threads that are created for each one that you can come back to if you want specific feedback on that project. I'm not sure what you guys will feel works best for you yet. So I don't know.
I mean, for me, just an open one's fine.
An open one for,
I mean, if I was to vote.
yeah, it feels like it would
Yeah,
Well,
we can just as
less
with
fragmented.
right?
Yeah, it might be hard to go look up
Each
through
one.
4
Different
different
ones, yeah.
discussion
Yeah,
for
that's
each
a good
one,
point.
but it
That's a
could
good
get
point.
long. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, why don't we start with an
Unless
open?
there's one
Yeah,
for each. There's the set. So I guess there could be one thread. I mean, each thread could be thematic if there's a thread for the set of
That's true. Yeah, you could just start a thread.
versus.
Okay, I'll sit down and try to look at it. When I plan things on my end, you know, it makes a certain kind of logic, and then when it kind of hits the public, I'm kind of like, oh, that didn't make any sense at all. But I'll try. I'll try first with an open thread, because I think that will, like you said, it'll be fewer logistics to deal with. And then if it seems like it's getting bulky or insane, maybe we can open up like part 2. But we'll see. Yeah. It seems like people are working with the discussion threads really well.
Maybe one for progress and one for final glaze pieces, maybe.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That way, if I'm getting ready to glaze, and I can just look up who glazed stuff to see how the glaze has turned out.
That's a good idea. So maybe one thread for like clay stage and one
for just final
stages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, final glaze. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's my idea.
No, I like that.
Can I ask you a question about the why? So you said that the oxide can run with glaze or with cause underglaze to run.
Underglaze.
Underglaze doesn't run.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we talked about 2 different things. So underglaze, if it is glazed over without bisquing between stages, can make your underglaze run just a little bit sometimes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll talk a little more about underglaze next week. But if you're working,
what is it that causes it to run on the what causes it to run more? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Makes it run.
It sort of fills into the, it sort of gets absorbed into the glaze and then runs with the glaze. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, because the stain is used in glaze and underglaze. So if the stain is underneath an underglaze and they fire together, your piece doesn't know that. So it's like, oh, I'm a glaze now, you know. So.
Right. Got it.
That's why I wanted to open up the hood and just talk about stains, because underglaze is not really different from glaze in its in the materials that it's using. We've talked about glaze chemistry, but I mean, there's nothing in underglaze that's like special to making it an underglaze. It just has proportions of the materials in it that make it not shiny. So if you put something on top of it that's going to be shiny, then your stain in the underglaze and the glaze are going to all fuse together and be like, oh, well, now I have like a lot of silica on top of me.
Right.
And I'm an unfired material. So guess what? Now I'm a glaze.
Right. Okay. So it's really the silica that starts to melt and run. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. Do you have any suggestions for the other projects, stuff for the free projects?
Let's see, I think we had the prompts. Let's see, get the canvas. There's ideas on there. Let me see. So if none of these interest you at all, you can always kind of do, and you have ideas that you want to do, I'm perfectly fine with that. But we do have a little kind of start off things I had on the syllabus here. Okay, sorry, I'm just opening up my files here. So you could have one piece showing how one glaze interacts with another glaze. You can have one project that's a set of pieces. So if you wanted to make a set of plates, or you know, a set of napkin rings, or a set of horses, I mean, it could be a set of anything. It's up to you. And then a project that is a series that expresses emotions. So if you did like 4 pieces, maybe you could do a piece from someone who goes from like sad to happy, or, you know, different stages of emotions while being in a pandemic, or, you know, something like that. Free projects, you know, those are pretty much up to you. I can look for different projects, but maybe something to supplement something you've already done. So if you did a teapot, you could do pieces that go with the teapot. So maybe like a sugar bowl and a creamer and serving plates or a tray. Butter dishes are cool. I like the way people interpret those. I mean, there's all different kinds of things you can do. If you want to do non-functional, I could show you guys how to, I don't know if everybody's kind of burned out on the human, but I do know how to make other parts of like the hands and feet, if you guys are interested in that. I don't know, but I like to just kind of cruise around and look and see what other people are doing and get ideas. There's going to be a ceramics conference coming up. I'll give you guys the link. Let's see, it's called NCECA. It's going to be online this year, but that is a really good place to get ideas. Let's see if I can find the link here. NCECA stands for the National Council on Education for the Ceramics Art. And they have it every year. And there's like tons and tons of demonstrations and talks and artists. Let's see, just, there we go, okay. I'll put the link in the chat here. And I think that they have a discount this year to go. So it's not free, it's paid, and the lectures will be up later on YouTube. But if you want to kind of participate this month while it is being broadcast, it's March 17th to the 21st. Registration's going on now, and that's going to have a ton of great people at it. You get an introduction to the wider world of ceramic arts. That'll be really fun. But I can look for things online by people that I think you guys would like and post them on Canvas too. Does that sound promising?
Yep.
Yeah, I find lots of inspiration on Instagram too. So.
Oh yeah, I love Instagram.
Yeah.
I get ideas from there. I'm still learning things. I just learned a technique for making a really cool rim on a mug the other day. I was like, wow, I never thought of that. Like, just take a little rolling pin and roll down your cut marks and get a nice smooth line on top. I'm like, well, why didn't I ever think of that?
That's crazy. Yeah.
I just did it for my Ceramics 1 class. I'm like, look at that. So yeah, I'm always learning.
Like a machine made it.
I know. I'm like, wow. Like mind blowing. All you need is a little, yeah, I got like a little brayer. I've like rated my stuff. I'm like, I know I have one of those. So I still get excited by looking at things online and finding new ideas. So.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll talk next week about underglazes, and I think if you haven't already, go ahead and post some ideas or progress on your portrait, and I will put more structure on the canvas, but not too much. Does that sound good?
Okay.
All right, everybody. We went way over. I'm so sorry. I got
Thank
on
you.
a bad start on my PowerPoint. I always try to get fancy. I'm like, this is the day I'm going to master Zoom. And then it's very humbling. All right. All right, guys.
Good.
All
We're good.
All
I
right.
liked it.
Thank you.
See
All
you
right,
next
guys.
time. then.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye-bye.
Bye.